Hi guys, whether you're listening to or watching this episode, today I'm delighted to be joined by John Evans, who's based out of North Carolina, right?
That's right. Thanks, Charles.
It's a pleasure. You may have, listeners, viewers may have heard or seen my interview with Laura McClurkin, the Master of Pilates, whom I think works with yourself, John. Is that correct?
That's right. Lauren and I are collaborating on a very unique, I think, wonderful opportunity for women who are finding themselves challenged by perimenopause and menopause. So we have constructed a combination of writing, expressive writing, and Pilates movements to help women manage their stress and the challenges that they have around their sexual lives because of perimenopause or menopause.
Okay, I will definitely come into that as kind of the meat of the conversation. But as people that are regularly tuned into this show will know, I always love to see how someone's background influences what they're doing now, or what we can learn from their background. So, you mentioned before the call that you studied at Oxford University in the UK. Can you tell us more about your studies, your kind of early career at university, and what you did?
Mm. Well, I was always fascinated with the role that language plays in developing our brains, not just in the way that people learn language and linguistics, but what influence our language has on how we learn about ourselves and how we learn about any other subject. And just became really fascinated with the role that writing can play in helping students learn what they're studying at university. And so um, I did some graduate work at Lincoln College in Oxford, studying with some scholars who were looking at the links between language and learning and how that could be applied to any subject. And then it came about at a time when personal computers were relatively unheard of.
Mhm.
But IBM was just coming out with its first version of the personal computer. And I wanted to see how we could capitalize on the power of word processing to help students write better and then learn more about themselves and learn more about the subjects they were studying. So I came up with a kind of an algorithm for using computers to teach literature, but in a, in a very unusual way. I don't mean like programs or things like that, but I mean just using a sequence of prompts that they would do applying to a text using the power of word processing to give them a glimpse. So for instance, what I would do in one of my exercises was allow students to write between the lines what they were reading between the lines.
Okay.
And by looking at what they were writing between the lines, we could do a kind of a miscue analysis. We could understand how some people come up with some very strange interpretations of what they've been reading.
Yep.
And it's all because they bring whatever they have in their backpack. They bring their previous experiences and prior knowledge to bear on whatever text they study.
Mhm.
And by making the implicit explicit, we can take a look at what they write between the lines and know better how to inform their practice, how to enhance their reading and writing ability. So that was one of the first things that I did. I was fascinated by the role that writing can play in our lives.
When you grew up, like when you were younger, did you read lots of books? Were you into writing in school? Like, were you into English? Like, was it always there, or you just as you got older kind of got into it?
Yeah, my mother was a very young mother. She had me when she was 18. My father worked a couple of different jobs, so he was very seldom home. My mom read to me constantly. She was an avid reader all her life, and she read all the classics to me: the Beatrix Potter, Peter Rabbit, all the classic kind of little golden books. We had books around the house all the time. My dad was a mechanic. My mom was a housewife. So they didn't have great schooling at all. Um, but they both liked to read a lot. My dad loved to read Western novels. He had grocery bags full of paperback books that he just devoured. And my mom liked to read other kinds of books too. Not a romance reader, but she read good works. And she would read to me, and until I was about 3 years old, she read to me every day, many hours a day, actually. And then that stopped because tragically she gave birth to a child who didn't live more than a month, and then she got postpartum depression and grieved the loss of that child, and then couldn't get out of bed for about a year.
Wow.
So that reading to me stopped, but my love of books continued. And yeah, I read voraciously as a child. Um, I read the encyclopedia from A to Z. My mom would go to the grocery store and bring a volume of the encyclopedia. If she bought a certain amount of groceries, the grocery store would give her a volume of the encyclopedia. So maybe letter A, B, and C, and so on. And she would bring that home with the groceries, and I would read it.
Wow.
But by the time it was time to get groceries again, I had read that one and I was ready for the next one. So when people ask me if I used to read a lot as a kid, I'd say, yeah, I read the encyclopedia from A to Z.
So,
But so I've always loved reading. I I followed that pursuit. I became a high school English teacher. Um, I started doing graduate work. I got a couple of master's degrees in English and in teaching English, and then I got a doctorate in education, teaching English to university students. So my love of my love of literature, my love of reading and books, just kind of, I just wanted to do that. I wanted to find a way to make a living doing that, and I knew I didn't want to be a mechanic. I didn't want to follow my dad's footsteps, and so I went to university to study to be a teacher, and then to be an English professor. I became an English department chair, and then an associate dean of general ed. And toward the end of my academic career, I became very interested in the connections between expressive writing and health. And luckily, I stumbled upon the work of James Pennebaker, and I reviewed a book of his, Writing to Heal,
mm-hmm.
for the National Association of Poetry Therapists. And then Jamie and I became friends. The conference that I used to go to when I was an academic was the Association of Writers and Writing Programs. It's called the AWP for short. It's the world's largest writers convention or conference in the world. And it generally brings together 10 to 12,000 people.
Wow.
Of course, it's been canceled this year. It usually happens in the spring. Some from the West Coast to the East Coast in the United States, or some the Midwest in Chicago or something like that. But Jamie was a member of my panel for expressive writing in 2006. And in 2007, I started the Wellness and Writing Connections Conference series in Atlanta. And we had this series, the last time we had it at Georgia Tech at the Global Learning Center in right downtown Atlanta. And we had about 200 people come from all over the world to talk about how they use writing with their patients and their clients. Wow. So social workers, psychologists, physicians, PAs, nurses, anybody who worked with patients in a whether it was a clinical setting or whether it was in a private setting, they came to the conference, and we had 42 concurrent sessions. So a number of, a lot of presenters, and I thought it was a good number of people to come. We averaged about 200 people a year, and we had that conference for 4 years. Wow. So 2007, 28, 29, and 2010 were the days of the conference. I published a book that was a collection of some of the programs in the first two conferences, and and that was published in 2010, I think. And then Jamie Pennebaker and I collaborated on a book called Expressive Writing, Words That Heal. And that was published in 2014. So my interest from reading and writing and the connections in personal development and education just kind of, as you say, the Jobs quote you said is a good one. You can connect the dots going backwards. You can't always connect the dots as you go forwards, but it seems like and feels like the most natural progression of interest for me, because it just seems like a natural outgrowth of my looking at how the brain. I was very fascinated with how the brain works and what role language plays in shaping the brain. And now with functional MRIs and the work that's being done with neuroplasticity by people like Rick Hansen and others at Stanford and Berkeley, it just shows that words have a very significant impact on not only what you're thinking, but how you think, how your mind processes different things. Language plays a huge role in shaping our world, because we have a stream of consciousness, or some people call it the interior monologue, that's going on in our heads all the time, describing our world to ourselves, telling ourselves the story about ourselves, and rehashing memories, and telling ourselves stories about what happened then. And that influences what is happening now. And it shapes neural pathways. So we have this, I'm also a national board certified health coach. And and in studying for the boards, I learned quite a lot about the way that habits are formed. And we talk about habits, about things that we do. Well, I get up at 5 o'clock, I go out and I row, and this is my habit. But we also have habits of the mind. We have habits of thinking. And many times it's our habits of thinking that really prevent us from doing the best that we possibly can in some situations. And our habits of thinking also prevent us from doing the things that we maybe really want to do, and inhibiting our ability to do those things as well as we can. And so learning about that, learning that synapses that fire together wire together. So just take that in for a second. Synapses that fire together wire together. So what happens in the brain when you begin to do things and they're combined with something else? So let's just say there are some kind of habits that are easy to describe this way. So let's say you're on a phone call with a friend and you're a smoker, and you just grab, reach for a pack of cigarettes, and you light up, and that's your ritual. That's oh, I'm on the phone with my friend, I'm going to have a cigarette, and I'm going to have a cup of coffee. And so that becomes synapses that fire together wire together. So every time you're on a phone call, you think, oh, I should have a cigarette, and a cup of coffee. So those things combined really lay down a neural pathway that is pretty sure to continue, because we seek pleasure and avoid pain. And so synapses that fire together wire together. So whatever the language is in your mind, whatever story you're telling yourself, reinforces that neural pathway, and reinforces your knowledge of yourself, and reinforces your self-image. And so that is a very hard beast to change. And it takes more work with language that goes in another direction.
I suppose it's a bit like the saying that thoughts become things. And I've just watched a little bit before this. There was there's an article in the New York Times. We'll come on to coronavirus and what that means in a moment, possibly. But there's an article about how this particular set of people are feeling really pressured to like be particularly productive because they're at home and they're working and all the rest of it. And they were saying that it's okay to be lazy, and this isn't quite that. But then Jordan Belfort, the guy from Wolf of Wall Street, then came on and was basically calling that out as being, look, if you create a habit, which is what he was saying, of being lazy, of not achieving things, all the rest of it, what then happens is, as you say, the sentences that fire scale, wide scale, all of a sudden that becomes you. It becomes, because they were talking about not setting goals, etc. And he was trying to explain that goals are so important because you have to stretch, you have to kind of, it's not about achieving them, it's about if I'm halfway there, I've still made progress, right? It's a stepping stone. Whereas the article with the New York Times was more about, it's fine to be a bit lazy right now, like don't be hard on yourself. And I think both have some merits, don't get me wrong. But Jordan Belfort certainly was talking exactly as you were saying, that if you allow yourself to become, oh, I'm not going to go to the gym because I don't feel like it, and that becomes a habitual thing, or I'm just going to eat this chocolate bar whilst I'm watching a film, or some popcorn whilst I'm watching a film, and that becomes a thing, that's super, as everyone will know. That's the reason, I suppose, that January New Year's resolutions don't stick, because they're not habitual. We don't kind of fuse them into our being. Is that kind of true?
Well, they say that it takes 21 days to make a habit.
Right.
Whatever you do for 21 days in a row without missing a day can become a habit. And generally in coaching, what we say is it takes about 3 months of working with a client to break a habit.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's continual practice. Whatever two things you associate together,
Yeah,
are things that then begin to shape that habit. So I think the abstract becomes concrete, as you say. Thoughts become things.
mm-hmm.
Everything begins with an idea. And
It's super interesting because coming back onto that New Year's resolution piece, something that I did this year, which has meant that I've actually kept to these things, and it actually plays into what you're saying exactly, is I set myself quarter goals rather than saying I want to lose weight and I'll just do it over the year. I just said, right, by end of March, which has just gone, I want to lose X amount. I want to have read X amount of books, and I want to, with my business, get it to a certain position. And all three things pretty much I've got to. The weight not quite there, but 3/4 way there. So it's still, I'm happy with that. And I think that's a really important thing, is that 12 weeks, like, again, there's another quote, and I'm misquoting it for sure, but it's kind of roughly saying that people overestimate what they'll do in a day or a week, and underestimate what they'll do in maybe 3 months, 6 months, or a year. And that's definitely true. 12 weeks is a period of time where you can genuinely make a big difference. Definitely.
that's what we see. I mean, that's from our experience, that's where we see the lasting benefit. It takes about 3 months and as you say, 12 weeks to have a lasting benefit. But it certainly is achievable.
So coming on to 2013, you were at Duke Integrative Medicine. Can you explain what integrative health coaching is, rather?
Yes. Integrative health coaching combines, and what it's integrating, it's integrating conventional medicine with non-traditional approaches. So for instance, you go to Duke Integrative Medicine and you see your physician, and you might spend an hour with your physician. The first time I went to Duke Integrative Medicine as a patient, before I actually started working there as a writing clinician, and I had an 80-minute appointment with my primary care physician. That's kind of unheard of. So they spend a lot more time with you. And then the other thing is, they look at the whole person.
Yeah.
So it's a holistic approach. It's not just a symptom approach.
Yeah.
It's a whole approach, that the illness that you're experiencing is a manifestation of other things.
Sure.
And not just a microbe, or not just I think we see that with COVID people as well. It really affects most devastatingly people who have had some kind of prior condition.
Yeah.
Some kind of weakness in their immune system.
Mm-hmm.
But what we see is, at Duke Integrative Medicine, we combine, traditional X-rays, blood samples, blood work, blood analysis, with acupuncture, with hypnosis, with guided imagery, with meditation, mindfulness-based stress reduction meditation, with yoga,
Mhm.
and with expressive writing.
Right.
So it's a combination of integrate. So the integrative part is bringing traditional, conventional medicine together with non-traditional um, types of medical practice. So whether it's a practice like mindfulness-based stress reduction or yoga or acupuncture, and then combining that with a a dietitian who's consulted, and looking at the whole person and not just treating the disease.
So in terms of obviously your specialty, your expertise in expressionist writing, what sorts of patients have you worked with within the aforementioned kind of Duke integrative medicine like program, for want of a better phrase? And what kind of results have you seen, and why are those results seen?
Mm-hmm. I work with a lot of cancer patients, actually.
Okay.
But I work with patients who have had all kinds of stress-induced or stress-related illnesses. So high blood pressure, rheumatoid arthritis, stress-induced asthma, um, diabetics who are having a hard time conforming to their regimen. Um, but many times they're cancer patients, and not just cancer patients who are in treatment,
Hmm.
but pediatric cancer patients who are out of treatment, but the illness has really caused them a great deal of emotional stress and sometimes physical stress.
Hmm.
So I can give you an example of that. I had a woman in one of my workshops who had been diagnosed with acute myeloid leukemia when she was 15.
Wow.
She had to have a bone marrow aspiration, which is a painful technique where they go in and they take some of your bone marrow and put it under a microscope to see what your blood cells look like, and it's usually done under anesthetics. But in her case, there was not an anesthesiologist on call when she came in, and they had to do the best they could with a local anesthetic, and then the nurses had to hold her down while they did this. So imagine a 15-year-old young woman lying on the gurney. These nurses are holding her down. She's screaming. It is very, very painful. She's scared to death because she doesn't know what's happening to her or why she's feeling the way she is.
Hmm.
And she felt helpless. They later on found that her sister would be a good match for bone marrow, and so she got a bone marrow transplant 3 days later from her younger sister. 17 years later, she's still suffering from side effects. She's been very depressed. She's shown all the signs of PTSD. Um, she hasn't been able to work because of her treatment. She's not able to have children. It has impacted her life tremendously. And so she said that expressive writing really helped her work through some of that. And it gave me an idea for a project at Duke, and we got a grant to do an intervention called Expressive Writing for Pediatric Oncology patients and their caregivers. Because one of the things we found was that when a child gets cancer, an elephant enters the room. And that is what the child and the parent cannot talk about.
Hmm.
Um, and that elephant carries a lot of things with it, like guilt, like fear, like shame. And expressive writing can help people work through those strong emotions. And I can say that. So we had a wonderful, actually, opportunity to research this. I had Rebecca come into my office with her mom, and and I said, "So Rebecca, what would you like to tell your mom about your cancer?" And she said, "Well, I felt so guilty for getting cancer. And I felt such shame for causing my family such grief and expense. And I said to her mom, I said, what would you like to tell your daughter about your experience with her having cancer? And she said, I felt guilty too. I felt guilty that I had not taken her into the doctor earlier when she first began to complain about being tired, and how I feel really guilty about not being a good mom. And I feel really shamed about that. And so guilt and shame are part of the cancer experience that people don't really think about very often.
Mm.
Um, the fear of death is always there. And when a child gets cancer, you don't want to mention death.
Sure.
It's such an unnatural sequence of events when a child gets cancer. And so that elephant in the room is a barrier between open communication between a child and the parent. And so that's what we wanted to address with our study. And that's what we did. That's one of the things we did. So then I worked with a lot of other cancer patients. I did a year-long project with the Leukemia Lymphoma Society in 2016. And we had about 130 patients, cancer patients, who took part in that study. We used expressive writing protocols that I had developed at Duke Integrative Medicine. And then breastcancer.org is interested in doing some work with expressive writing as well. But I also work with ICU nurses, and in that capacity, I work to help stem burnout. And we have found that expressive writing is a very effective tool for helping people overcome what they felt they could never get over.
So in terms of the actual practice of expressionist writing, I have an idea of what this, but can you just like explain what that is? Is it someone just getting a pen and paper like I've got here and just writing what they're feeling about, or are you guiding them in some sort of way? What's the actual practice look like?
Well, it's not journaling.
Right.
I just want to say that right away, because it's often confused with journaling. Expressive writing is not journaling. Expressive writing follows a pattern, a progression, and journaling does not.
Okay.
Journaling is not progressive, and journaling is not prompt driven. Journaling is sitting down, and I have stacks and stacks of notebooks where I have kept, where I would say those were my journals. I don't do that so much anymore, because I realized that when I was journaling, I was actually keeping myself in the same place.
Interesting.
And it's because the power of language to do that. Language will either reinforce where you are, or it can take you beyond where you are, but you have to change your language. If you write in your journal about the same thing in the same way over and over with the same tone, using almost the same vocabulary, you're going to re-traumatize yourself, and you're going to keep yourself entrenched in the habits of mind that you've had before you even picked up the pen. So expressive writing is not journaling. I just want to make that really clear, because there are a lot of people out there who really tout the advantages of journaling, but no research has ever shown that journaling has a positive effect on anything.
Interesting.
There's no research that shows that.
That is interesting.
There's a lot of anecdotal information that suggests that journaling is helpful and people enjoy it and all kinds of things like that, but there is not one single study that shows that journaling has a health benefit.
That's surprising.
Well, I can see where that would be surprising.
To a layperson.
With research, what you try to do is restrict the variables. You want to be able to account for all the variables.
Yeah.
Because otherwise you can't really say this is the result of that.
Sure.
Right? And journaling is just different for everybody.
Makes sense.
You can't control the variables.
Yeah. Yeah, because the minute you say to someone, okay, you got to journal in this exact way, then it's not their own journal, is it? It's kind of, yeah, that makes sense.
So with expressive writing, now I've been working really closely with Jamie Pennebaker. At least I try to draw him into projects that I'm doing whenever I have questions, because he really is the world's expert on expressive writing. And
Right.
we had a conversation a couple of weeks ago, and he was saying that he was preparing for a talk, and he noticed that there were over 2,000 studies about expressive writing
Mm-hmm.
since 1983.
Mm-hmm.
And I know when we did our book, I did the review of the literature for that book, and in the back pages you'll find um, you know 15, 20 pages of references
Yeah.
on expressive writing. Um, and so there's a lot of research that shows that expressive writing is beneficial
Mm-hmm.
to health, but there is a pattern of it. And expressive writing is simply putting down your feelings, putting your feelings down on paper without regard to conventions like spelling, punctuation, or grammar, and also making sure that you are really expressing your deepest thoughts and feelings about whatever it is that's bothering you.
Okay.
And the experiments started out with write about your most traumatic experience in your entire life,
Mm-hmm.
write about your deepest thoughts and feelings about this, write about how it has affected your relationship with yourself, your relationship with other people, how it has affected how you think about your life in general, and how you think about your future life, how you think about your past, how you think about your present, how you think about your future.
Okay.
Write about the emotions as much as you can. Put down your feelings, and not pay attention so much to what happened or why it happened or any of that kind of stuff, but just put down your feelings about it. So that's kind of the first step of expressive writing. And then now you could say, well, people do that in journals, and it's true they do. But then the second part is, okay, now I'd like you to write about your most traumatic event from a different perspective.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like you to write about it from the perspective of someone else who was there, someone else who was involved, or write about yourself in the third person,
Interesting.
or using your name, your own name. So, um, you know,
That's really
and
interesting.
then the fourth thing, the final prompt in expressive writing is, all right, so it's time to be really honest with yourself about your feelings and thoughts about this event, and to um, wrap that up into a satisfying story that you would like to take with you into the future.
Okay.
And so there's this progression of prompts in expressive writing. That there are three or four prompts. It depends on um, kind of depends on the researcher at the time, but those have been called the Pennebaker paradigm. Those four, that sequence of four prompts: write about your most traumatic experience, write about your deepest thoughts and feelings. You do that for 15 or 20 minutes. Then you write about it again after a little bit of time has passed, because what we find is that a lot of times people think about what they wish they had written, and they go away from it and they think about, oh, I could have written this. So the second prompt is just to kind of come through it again and make sure we pick up any straggling thoughts. And then the third thing is to change your perspective. Write about it from a different perspective, or write about yourself from in the third person.
Mm-hmm.
And then the fourth thing is to, all right, now create a meaningful, satisfying story about this event that you wish to take with you into the future. And that's the Pennebaker paradigm.
So in your cancer patient example, it would be the person writing about their own shame or guilt and that kind of thing. Then they'd return back to that. Then they'd change perspectives, maybe what their mother might think about the situation, or their third person. That's the kind of process. Is that right?
Yeah, that's it. So Rebecca might write about how her mother felt, what it must have been like for her mother or
Right.
for her sister.
Mm-hmm.
or from her father, or whoever else, maybe her friends on the volleyball team,
Mm-hmm.
where she was a star volleyball player, and all of a sudden she can't be a member of the team. So write about it from the perspective of her coach or her volleyball players or any of her other teammates, or maybe from the perspective of her boyfriend, who
Mm-hmm.
could no longer see her for 2 or 3 months,
Mm-hmm.
and then what happens in teenage romances is,
Yep.
there are broken hearts and things like that. And then, yeah, finally, to try to create a story that you want to tell yourself about this event in the future. And that is so different from journaling.
Yeah. So
Hardly anybody in a journal ever writes about it from a different perspective.
no.
And hardly anybody in a journal ever begins to create a satisfying story about the thing that's bothered them that they wish to take with them into the future. And
Mm.
yet it is the stories that we tell ourselves about ourselves that keep us in the ego state that we're in.
So with that story for the cancer patient initially would be one of shame and guilt and all those sort of emotions. And then when they've gone through this process, that story may look very different, where they acknowledge that both more than them, the parties had the guilt, and that it changed their thoughts and feelings about the experience. Is that the idea, from looking at it at a different angle and expressing themselves? Is that the idea?
That's part of the idea. I can give you the example of another person that I've worked with.
Sure.
Now, I worked with a woman who had stage 4 ovarian cancer.
Mm-hmm.
I worked with her for 3 years, the last 3 years of her life.
Right.
And she was very angry when she first came to see me. She felt like the medical system had failed her. They didn't catch her cancer until it had taken most of her internal organs. Her her uterus, her cervix, everything had to be, she told me when I first met her, she said, they gutted me like a fish.
Right.
And she was very angry, very, she was very angry. And so I worked with her through the Transforming Health Right to Heal sequence that I've developed. And then she wanted to write her illness memoir, her illness narrative. And we published that, and it's actually published as a blog online too. I can send you a link.
Please, I'll put the show notes. Yeah.
But she became, through the writing, she really lived the life that she wanted to live, even though she went through several chemical trials while I was working with her. Mm-hmm. We met once a week for an hour for 3 years.
Wow.
And she would bring me about 3 pages of her book, and she would read them to me, and I would tell her what I liked and what I'd like to know more about. And she would continue to write that way. And through the writing, she became a different person. She was no longer angry. She had made peace with, she knew where her trip was going. Mm-hmm. Very few people survive stage 4 ovarian cancer. She knew she had about 5 years from diagnosis. And so I met with her the week before she died. And and we talked about what cover she wanted on her book. And so she was an artist. She was a visual artist. She did paintings, and we included a lot of her paintings in the book as well. Wow. So it really changed her perspective. It didn't cure her cancer, but it healed her from a lot of childhood wounds. She had a very, very difficult childhood, and it healed her in the sense that she was no longer angry. And she was at peace when she died.
It's amazing. I mean, going to the period we're at now, where the world's on lockdown, people have a lot more time in their hands, and not traveling. Certain people aren't working on furlough, etc. I'm just wondering, that presents an opportunity for people to, look into this practice for themselves. What would you suggest to people that are, thinking about this could be an interesting exercise? How do I go about it? What do I need to do?
Well, I'm collaborating with the Health Humanities Lab at Duke right now. We're offering a 90-minute writing session every Friday. It meets at 12:30. Last Friday, we had 75 people on the Zoom session.
Amazing.
And they were there from all the way from Nova Scotia. They were from all over North America. They were there from Nova Scotia, Canada, to LA, California,
Wow.
and all kinds of places in between. And we are doing expressive writing, and what we're now, I guess, calling, I'm reluctant to say this, but there was a film crew from Denmark who did a documentary about my work at Duke Integrative Medicine with one of my cancer patients. And she said, "So what is this thing that you do?" And I said, "Well, I don't know. I've just been calling it the expressive writing extended." And she says, "Well, no, it's really the Evans method." Uh, and I thought, well, okay, I never really thought about that. I'm not sure I want a method named after me,
Sure.
but I guess, it's the Evans method, because what I've done is I've taken the Pennebaker paradigm,
Mm-hmm.
and because of things I studied going all the way back to Oxford through my other graduate work, when I got back to the States in my doctoral program, I have extended the Pennebaker paradigm through transactional writing, poetic writing, affirmative writing, legacy writing, and mindful writing.
Mm-hmm.
And so I added 5 other types of writing to the Pennebaker paradigm, and we're calling that the Evans method. And we are using that for COVID-19 on Fridays at 12:30.
Brilliant. Well, I'll definitely put a link into the description for.
So I can send you a link to that and the
Brilliant.
little blurb, the advert that we've created for that.
Please do, and I'll put it in the show notes so we can kind of hopefully you can get some people logging on from the UK.
Great. And I can also send you a link to Jamie Pennebaker has put up a website for expressive writing during the pandemic, and I can send you a link to that as well.
Super. Yeah, that'd be absolutely brilliant. I think this is your quote, which is "Write yourself well." Is that your quote?
It could be.
Yeah.
I've probably said things like that.
Yeah, I think it's on your website or could be in LinkedIn, but I think that's a great way to leave the conversation, and it's been really super interesting. And yeah, it's interesting because I personally have started journaling, and then now when I think about what you're talking about, I can actually understand very much so that the expressionist writing, which I might give a go, is probably more beneficial to what I'm trying to achieve, I suppose.
I could put you in touch with somebody in the UK who's taking my course right now.
That'd be interesting. Yeah, it'd be interesting to see the perspective.
Yeah, he's a filmmaker. I can't out him right now on the podcast, but I'll ask him if I can connect you. And he has worked through the first 8 assignments, and so he can tell you firsthand what it's like to do the work.
Yeah, that'd be. I mean, I always, I always go back to when I was at school. I used to love writing and all that sort of stuff. So maybe it's something that I've not done for a long period of time. We're all typing on computers, doing what we're going about our day, but maybe it's something that I should look into. Very interesting.
I think he's in the Cotswolds right now. I know he lives in London normally, but I think he's moved out to the countryside, so it's not so congested and so on. But yeah, I think he lives in the Bloomsbury area, probably around the British Museum.
Sure. Well, listen, thank you so much for your time. It's been an absolute privilege.
It's great to talk with you. Thank you.
Really interesting. I'm sure the audience will find much to ponder and to think about. And given the current space, hopefully some of them will look at your online course and start the practice.
Oh, that would be great. Thanks a lot. I'm sorry we didn't get to talk about my work with Lauren. That maybe that could be another time.
Sounds great. Thank you so much, John.
All right. Thank you, Charles.